What's up YouTube? My name is Joystick. I have a brand new video for you today. We're going to be talking about the 2021 Overwatch League season. I'm going to give you guys my power rankings for each team, and I want to see how all these teams match up, with the new roster changes, everything that's gone on in the off season. I want to show you guys what my insight is and, my, top 500 knowledge, Grandmaster knowledge. I've been playing against some of these players in ranked, so I've been seeing, how good some of these pros are matching up. But, I obviously don't know everything about these teams, and I'm just going to give you guys what I know. So take everything with a grain of salt, and let's hop right into it. So starting off, I'm going to throw the San Francisco Shock in at S tier. I think it's only fair that they get, number one spot, S tier team, the two-time Overwatch League champions. I think it's really fitting that they get number one spot, the S tier. They still got a really solid roster, even though they dropped Ons. They got rid of Moth and put in FD God. They picked up Nero, they picked up Glister. They still have a really strong roster in Super. Striker, Rascal, Choi, Smurf, Violet's really stacked across the board, even though they've lost a couple pieces here and there throughout the last two seasons. Obviously Sinatra's gone. So Shock still look really good, and I think their coaching staff is really what makes them good as well. No matter what kind of players they have in their field, they always find a way. That's just how the Shock is and the Shock organization is. So I think it's really fair that they are number one. Let's bring in the Seoul Dynasty. I'm also going to throw them in at S tier as well, just because Seoul Dynasty, they're the runner-ups last year against the Shock in the finals, and they still look very deadly. Their roster just looks really good across the board still. Gesture, Marvel, that really nice tank duo. They brought in Toyu pretty late in the season. They got DPS line is still stacked, right? Sadie Obi, Prophet, Fitz, and then the back line's just great as well. Creative, Animo, Toby. That looks good. I think that's a just all-around solid team, scary team, really nice roster, and they definitely deserve that number 2 spot. Might subject to change. We'll see depending on the meta, on how the meta looks out for Overwatch League. And the Philly Fusion also at S tier. I think it's only fair that this team, deserves credit because they still have a nasty cracked roster. EQO, Carpe, and Shockwave. That DPS line is still very strong. They just brought in Mano in the tank line, which I think is a very huge roster move, which makes them still a very deadly team. It's kind of a hot take to put them at S tier, but I'm going to throw them there just for now. I think they could be considered high A, but, they still got Alarm, who got Rookie of the Year. Funny Astro, amazing Lucio player in himself. I think Fusion is still really up there in terms of power rankings. Shanghai Dragons at A tier. I wanted to put them at S tier, which, I definitely could. They could be in the spot of the Fusion, but I threw them at high A tier because they brought in a new main tank. They brought in Fate, and I'm curious to see how that changes the chemistry of the roster, because the main tank really is important in terms of synergy and how this team will perform. They had Fearless, who was doing really well with them, so we'll see how Fate does in that new main tank spot. Obviously they still got Fleta. They just brought in Erster from the Atlanta Reign. They got DM, Lip, cracked DPS. And, across the board, Fate with Void, the tank duo is looking nice. And then Izzyaki, Li Jae obviously really talented. And then Molly, they brought in from the Chengdu Hunters. So I think, the Dragons are definitely going to have a successful 2021 season. Nonetheless, so all right, the Washington Justice moving in actually into A tier. Believe it or not, I think this team is on the rise. I think this is the team to look out for this season. They are looking deadly. Their roster looks really stacked. They brought in Fury. They brought in Rhea from the Spark. They brought in just all these little bits and pieces, right? They got Decay. They got Jerry from the Uprising. closer from the fuel. They still have Bebe on the roster. Wait, no, Bebe came from the Spark. They kind of revamped a little bit, and they got Tuba Decay on the DPS. It's looking pretty scary, right? And then I think this is a team to look out for, and they might do some damage this season. So I put them in A. They probably, it might be a little bit of a hot take, but they could be like B even, but a high B, low A here. But that's my hot take. And then next, moving on, I have another hot take. This one might surprise you guys, but Dallas Fuel in the A tier. Okay, their roster's looking good as well. Like it looks solid just across the board. Like you look at, they brought in Fearless from the Shanghai Dragons, unreal main tank, and I think that's what they needed. They needed a main tank presence. They needed to throw out Muma. Muma wasn't doing anything on main tank, right? They bring in Fearless. Now they have a good main tank, and now they have a chance at like actually making a run for playoffs. So look at their roster. They got Sparkle, they got Xe, they got Hanbin, they got Fielder. Basically took Paris Eternal's roster and just revamped it from last season. Got Repel, Jaxay in the backline. They got Doha even. Just cracked, like DPS, just insane. Tank line, and then it's a solid backline to fill. To feel it out. I think this roster's looking really great. So Dallas Fuel, hot take, will be pretty good this season. And I think it's about time they do, because, they've had obviously most lackluster seasons in the past. So I think it's only fair. The Florida Mayhem, I'm going to throw them at high beats here. They just brought in OGE, and then they still have, their solid roster from last season with the, off the back of BQB, Yaki, and Gargoyle was just a solid off tank. Gangnan Jim, crazy good on the support. And then they just brought in Slime from the Seoul Dynasty. So I think that's a solid roster in itself. And the Mayhem are going to continue to succeed and get some wins, and probably like surprise a lot of teams actually. I feel like they have the ability to contest with like almost any team in the league. So they could have maybe moved up to A, but I threw them at high B. I think that's only fair. Talk about the New York Excelsior. They're moving in at B as well. I think New York Excelsior, they have definitely flipped their roster around a lot. They still have Jay Jonak, obviously, which automatically makes them a scary team. So they brought in Bianca, Yakpung. So it's interesting tank moves that they made. They got rid of Mono, got rid of Meko. They've kind of like moved their whole roster around. They brought in Ivy from the Fusion, and they have new support player in Friday. So we'll see what happens with the New York Excelsior. I think they will still be strong. That's just the type of organization they are. They always just have they always find a way to make things work, and always contest at the top at the highest level. So we'll see what happens with Excelsior. I think it's a little bit of they might drop down a little bit to even see, depending on how they, the chemistry and stuff goes with that. But we'll find out. We'll find out, right? They always find a way. That's the thing. I have a bit of another hot take. We're going to bring the Boston Uprising in. They basically revamped the entire roster across the board. They still have a couple pieces from last season, but, they brought in Soon on the DPS. They brought I'm37 on the DPS, and they brought, more importantly, Stand 1, a really solid tank player from the Shanghai Dragons. That's going to be the important piece. I think they're kind of missing like backbones of the roster. Fusions I think is a pretty solid main tank. Color Hex is a very underrated DPS. Myongbun, super underrated on the support, and I think Punk is has some potential too. We'll see what happens with that. It's a little bit of a hot take. I think they might float around the C tier range, but I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt, and they might do some damage this season. I'm gonna throw them in at that B tier spot. All right. So moving on to the Houston Outlaws. This is my team, guys. Hope you guys are supporting me and joining the Houston Outlaws as the content creator. We find out about that on March 4th, actually. March 4th, 7 p.m. CST on the Houston Outlaws channel. If you guys want to check that out, hoping to join the Houston Outlaws as a content creator and streamer. But moving forward, I'm throwing them at B tier because I think they do have potential. I think, seriously, unbiased opinion, I do think they have potential. Dante is really, really solid on the DPS. They brought in KSF and they brought in Happy. I think Happy is like the X factor right now for this team. unbelievable hit scan player, and I think that is really what's going to come down to here. Hydration is still in the tank slot, but I think they brought in 2 new tank players, so we'll see how those 2 tank players really synergize with the team. And then they brought in Juby and Crimzo as the backline for the supports, so this is going to be an interesting season for the Outlaws. I feel like they have a chance to really shine, but it's really going to come down to like execution, and if this team can really mesh together. It's a lot of different pieces from a lot of different areas all coming together, and I think it could be something special, which I'm really looking forward to. All right. To the Chengdu Hunters, I'm gonna throw them right behind the Outlaws here. I think that the Chengdu Hunters are always kind of a hit or miss team, but they definitely have their moments depending on the meta. I think this meta coming up looks really, really good for them, actually, because they like to run the Wrecking Ball. They like to run the Zarya. That Zarya Ball, I think, is where they're really, really good at. And then they run the Pharah, the Farah Mercy, and then, like a Tracer with that. They have, like, the pieces they need to run that type of style, and I think that's what they're going to keep doing. Aiming on the ball, and just all the pieces revolve around aiming, and then you just run that, like, that poke damage, that's, that really, really aggressive, kind of dive-ish with balls. So it's really, I think this is the meta that could really help the Chengdu Hunters excel, and we'll see what happens with them. But I feel like this team is such a hit or miss. Like I could have thrown them in C tier easily, but I'm gonna give them some time, some time to get things going. But we'll see what happens with them. They still have this solid roster, Jinmu, Leave. Aiming, Elsa, Late Young still, and they just brought in like 5 other new pieces. I won't get into those, but a lot of nice contenders players. But they're looking still pretty nice. So we'll see what happens with that. Next, I'm gonna bring in the LA Gladiators. I'm gonna put them at low B tier, honestly high C. It's just this team. It's got some question marks around it, right? They brought in nice, really, really strong players. They just brought in Moth, the 2-time SF Shock champion main support, which might get them going. So I think this team has really nice potential. They have, obviously they have Birdring, Mir. They brought in Kevster, just really, really insane DPS players. But, they still have the back of space. But, like, who is their main tank going to be? And, like, how is this team going to actually, like, find its identity? I feel like this team doesn't really have an identity yet. So it's really going to come down to this season, I feel like, to really show if they are a high tier team or if they're really not. So this really is a deciding factor here. So next we're bringing in the Paris Eternal at high C tier. This is kind of a questionable thing for me because, a lot of these players just like got thrown in from contenders from like the same team, and they all just got kind of like meshed together into the Paris Eternal. They brought in Ellie Vote, they brought in Oni God from the Fuel, they brought in Suna from the Titans, and Neptuno from the Charge. So like there's a lot of different pieces from a lot of different rosters from last season, which really makes me wonder if this team's gonna actually even do anything in the Overwatch League. But I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt and throwing them at high C. I wanted to throw them almost at D tier, but like I feel like they have that tapped EU potential that I think that everyone's gonna be sleeping on. So I'm not gonna sleep on the Paris Eternal. They might pop off here. All right, we have the Hangzhou Spark. And this team still looks pretty solid across the board. Like, they lost Rhea, but they brought in Architect. They got Gatsby, right? They got the solid backline in IDK, Mika, Coldest, brought in Coldest, and then Gushue still is a really, really talented main tank in itself. So I'm not sure about their off-tank situation yet, but Hangzhou Spark still look really, really solid. And I think they could easily move up to the B tier, high B tier even. But I threw them at C tier just because I don't think they have like the highest, they don't have like the scariest roster, but they still look like relatively solid. So that's like the best way I could describe the Hangzhou Spark to you. Architect I think could definitely get this team going and move them into B tier easily. So we have the Guangzhou Charge, throwing him right behind the Spark here because we got we got Krong, we got Rio, solid tank line, but they never really impressed me too much. I'll be honest with you. Kareev really impressed. Obviously, Eileen is really, really good, and they brought in McKaylee. We'll see what happens with this guy. And then Mandu on the back line as well. I think Guangzhou Charge is just like the Spark. They have that solid roster, but they really haven't brought their tier level of gameplay up to that really, really like A tier, S tier level. They have a, they have the solid roster all around the board, but it's not like the scary roster you look at and you're like, yeah, this is something that's really we got to be worried about. But like I said, these teams tend to upset and tend to prove you wrong. So the Guangzhou Charge easily can move up to B tier as well. I would not be surprised about that. Bringing in the London Spitfire. This team is also like there's a lot of question marks around it, right? They have a lot of EU players being brought in, and Hottie, Sparker, Mulf, and they brought in Kellex from the Defiant. They brought in Bernard from Bernard was on the last year's roster, so Bernard stayed. And Blase, they brought in Blase from the Houston Outlaws. So this, a lot of question marks. This team kind of reminds me of the Paris Eternal. Kind of reminds me of the LA Gladiators. Are they going to mesh together with all these different pieces from everywhere in the world, right? So that's why there's, I can't really rank them very high yet because they have a lot to prove. So I think C tier is a fine place for them to start, and they might even move up a couple spots from there and maybe into low B. We'll find out, right? But for now, I think it's fair to have London Spitfire at C tier. Vancouver Titans at D. I think this team is very similar to like the last couple that I just mentioned. They just brought in Linkser, and they brought in Fire from the Atlanta Reign. They brought in Fried Wiener from the Atlanta Reign, and those are, I really like the Linkser pickup. The other two, I still have question marks about. Obviously they still have Rolf. They have Dalton and Shredlock. I feel like they have a little bit of untapped potential, and this team has a lot to prove, honestly. They still do. Like, compared to the first season that the Vancouver Titans were in the league, like, it's just a completely different, Vancouver Titans, right? Let's be honest. So I think the Titans can move up to C tier easily. And it's gonna be at the back of Linkser. I think Linkser really becomes the X factor here, and has to be that game changer type of DPS player for them, and has to be that mainstay DPS, right? There's no other way I see the Vancouver Titans just popping off the season unless Linkser and Dalton just absolutely carry this team. So we'll see what happens with that. Moving on, with Ronto Defiant, throwing him at D tier as well. This team, they picked up some pieces. They picked up Sato, they picked up Hisu, both from the Philly Fusion. They still have Beast and Logics. I don't think they have revealed their support line yet, but this team still has a lot to prove. Also, Toronto Defiant is these pickups are pretty good actually. Sato and Hisu, pretty solid pickups, but they could I could see them moving to C tier, even maybe low B, depending on how these new pickups work out for them, because I think they have potential, and I don't think this is a team you can sleep on really necessarily. So I'm starting them off pretty low in the rankings, just based off these fresh new pickups to the roster, and they still got a lot to prove, right? They haven't really done a whole lot in the league, and it's it's definitely shown. So very lackluster seasons. Bring in the Atlanta Reign. I think this, I feel bad saying this, but I think this might be it's hard to throw them at E tier, but I feel this roster doesn't really stand out to me. I think Gator Hawk is a really strong tank line. Edison, and they brought in Pelican on DPS. They have good potential. I think they move up. I think they move up to D, C easily. I'm starting them off at E tier here, and I think that's just only fair based off, the roster just doesn't stand out to me. Other than I think their tank line has to carry this. I think Gator and Hawk are really strong tanks. I think they have to hard carry the Atlanta Reign. if they want a chance at actually moving up in the power rankings in this season. And then last but not least, I think LA Valiant, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think they're participating in the 2021 season, so I'm throwing them right at F tier. They don't even have a roster, so they don't even get a spot in the power rankings, okay? So this will wrap things up for this video. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section on this, the power rankings and all that. What you guys would have if we would make any changes to my list. I think my list looks pretty solid, for a preseason Owl 2021, power rankings list. But let me know what you guys think. Make sure you guys check out my twitch.tv/joystickow. And don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.